today. I'm Amanda Klein, and I will be facilitating the webinar that's jointly hosted by Teaching Strategies and by Teachstone. Understand the class tool and gain strategies for improving teacher-child interaction. Before we get started, we want to take care of a few introductory matters. First, I want to make sure that you can hear us, so please type yes in the question and answer box, which is on the right-hand side of your screen, if you can hear us. We'd love to answer questions during the webinar, and you can submit them during the presentation in the same question box. If you have any lessons learned that you would like to share, we'd also welcome those here. We'll answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation, and if we run out of time and don't get to your question, we'll make sure and email you in the next week with a response. One of the common questions that we receive when we host webinars is whether we offer certificates of participation or continuing education credits, and unfortunately the answer for that is no. Okay, it looks like most participants have logged on and you can hear us, so let's go ahead and get started. Today's webinar is brought to you by two organizations, Teaching Strategies and Teachstone, who are co-hosting because we share the same goals and are deeply committed to supporting teaching and learning. We recognize the use of the class tool and the creative curriculum in response to needs within the Head Start community, and we want to help to meet those needs. As leaders in the field of early education, both our organizations are committed to program quality and to supporting Head Start programs in achieving excellence. From today's webinars, we hope to help you gain an understanding of how class measures fit into Head Start recompetition and explore strategies for improving classroom interactions and class scores. Today it is my pleasure to introduce our two presenters, Rebecca Berlin, PhD, and she's the Chief Operating Officer at Teachstone, and Clarissa Martinez, our Content Development Associate at Teaching Strategies. Dr. Berlin has her master's in infant and early childhood special education from George Washington University and her PhD in research policy and administration from the University of Virginia. Rebecca is currently the COO at Teachstone, and among other things is charged with leading their efforts around professional development and support to the field as class becomes more widely used in the Head Start and QRS systems around the country. Clarissa Martinez graduated from the University of Texas at Austin with a degree in applied learning and development with a specialization in bilingual education and English as a second language. As a content development associate at Teaching Strategies, she provides content for resources such as the creative curriculum for preschool and coaching to fidelity. We're thrilled to hear from our two experts today, so let me turn things over to them. Clarissa?
Thank you, Amanda. So I'm Clarissa, and I'm so glad to be able to present here with y'all today, and I just want to share a great welcome to everyone for attending. I know that this is a very busy time of year, so we really appreciate your attendance and your enthusiasm, so thank you. So I thought we'd start with an overview of the Office of Head Start recompetition. And the first is a goal. I thought we'd start with the goals of the recompetition. And let's see. Let's see, there we go. So the goal of the recompetition, this is a quote from the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Kathleen Sebelius, and he says, "We are committed to funding only those organizations that provide the highest quality services to our children and families." So clearly the quality of services is at the heart of recompetition. And this slide shows a quote from the Office of Head Start policy document for the redesignation renewal system, and the quote reads that it was established in this part to determine whether Head Start and early Head Start agencies deliver high-quality services to meet the educational, health, nutritional, and social needs of children and families that they serve. So again, obviously the focus here is on the quality of the program, and certainly this should come as no surprise to many of y'all. These are the recompetition triggers, And the one that we're going to be focusing on the most is the last one there in blue, failure to meet minimum thresholds of pre-K class domains. And we're going to look at the pre-K class domains a little bit later. So let's go ahead and I'll turn this over to Rebecca.
Good afternoon. This is Rebecca from Charlottesville. In this section of the presentation, I'm going to spend a few minutes connecting us back to the reason each and every one of us started in education. It's the mission each of us holds deep in our hearts, the mission that gets us up every morning, and this is the part I like the best. It's the mission that helps us in those fairly easy days, and especially those days that are really difficult. We are here today because we want to improve the quality of education for our children in our classrooms, our centers, our programs, and our nation. We now know that through decades of research that the best way to improve outcomes for children is to focus on teacher-child interaction. So let's talk about that for a few minutes. When I think about why to focus on the importance of relationships and teacher-child interaction, I think about three primary reasons. These are three of my favorite things about the class. I think about the fact that interactions matter to student learning more than any other factors. They are the how to improve student outcomes. We now know from over 30 years of research that interactions matter more than a teacher's degree, more than length of experience, or number of toys and books in the classroom. It is student interactions that drive learning, and as a result, interactions are the things worth paying attention to and working on because they are constant and high value. The second piece is that interactions define and clarify what we already know about effective teaching. There's a what that teachers are already doing that we want them to do more of, to do more often, with more consistency, and more deliberately. So whenever I present, I stop at this point because it really is, it's a simple point, but I think it's important. We all have teachers who do the right thing during center time, perhaps during free play, but they struggle maybe during a transition, maybe during teeth brushing time, maybe during breakfast or lunch. And if we can pinpoint those interactions that they are doing well in the time that they're easiest for them, and then help them to make them more often, with more consistency and more deliberately, we can really change education. The other thing I say about the class is that the domains and dimensions of the class are not surprising. They are the things that we already know about great teaching. But what the class system gives us is the ability to be specific about what interactions look like and sound like. And when we are able to link the teacher's actions through behavioral markers and specific examples, we have the ability to better support teachers in a manner focused on outcomes. And the third reason that it's important to focus on teacher-child interaction is a simple one. It's really my favorite. Interactions represent the heart and core of teaching. They are the why we come to work every day. The class domains and dimensions give us a set of common definitions of the why of teaching. These are the aspects of teaching that anyone can relate to and aspire to and continually improve. When each of us thinks back to our days as a teacher or child care administrator, it is not the perfect art project, the most comprehensive data set, or the carefully articulated lesson plan that we remember. It is specific interactions with the child that we remember. I think it's back to the 90s when I was a teacher in Arlington. And I remember when a little boy in my pre-K classroom then noticed that his classmate, Emily, walked with a walker. And he said to me, how can I help her learn how to walk? And then as an inclusion teacher in Madison, Virginia, I remember when Ryan came to me crying because it was his last day of school. And this is going to be his last day at the little school before he moves to the big school. I think many of us are going through that right now with either our children or with the children in our classroom. He needed comfort for the emotion he was feeling and support from me that it would be okay. I'm sure that each and every one of you has memories like this, and those memories are tied to interactions. And it is those interactions that are so powerful in the work that we do. And now we know through the class that they're really important to change child outcomes. we've learned about research. So this graphic illustrates when we see higher class scores, what are some of the focus areas that we see? One of the things we see is greater student behavioral engagement and stronger social skills. So in the preschool research, we see that more effective interactions are associated with gains in social competence and lower behavior problems. Next thing we see is stronger vocabulary and reading outcomes are related to school readiness. In preschool, more effective teacher-child interactions are associated with higher scores in vocabulary and reading, and these are key skills that we all know that kindergarten teachers are asking us for each and every day. And then the last piece that we often see are increased math achievement scores with higher class scores. We know that more effective interactions in preschool are also associated with increased math outcomes, and these include counting, numeracy, comparisons, addition and subtraction, and even telling time. My role at Keystone has spent a great deal of time presenting at conferences with state leaders, teachers, Head Start directors, and managers. And my favorite questions that I get are, how do I do the class? Or I did the class, now what? And so at Keystone, we think of class not just as an observation tool, but as a comprehensive integrated system that allows educators to learn about effective interactions, measure effective child-teacher interactions, and improve teacher-student interactions. As you heard me through my emphasis, interactions are at the center of this integrated system. Time must be spent on all three aspects of the system to improve teacher-child interactions. As leaders in education, it is important to think about three things. Number one, how am I going to help my teachers learn about the class measure and what it means? And then second, how am I going to use the class measure to effectively observe the classrooms within my program? And then last, how am I going to use the language and the lens of the class to improve interaction? I know that many of us are familiar with the class structure. This is a face-to-face presentation I was giving. A lot of you who have heard me present before, this is when I'll pause and say, I'm a data geek, and what I'd like to know is a little bit more about you. So I often ask a question about, do you have a low level of knowledge about the class, a mid-level of knowledge about the class, and a high level of knowledge about the class? And then I could scaffold my interactions with you. But I think that even if you have a high level of knowledge on the class, I think it's important to pause and look for a moment at the domain and dimensions that make up the class. The entire observation measure is focused on interactions, specifically about how teachers use these interactions to focus time and materials to get the most out of every moment of every day. And I think it's important to pause here and remember that it's not just the instructional support dimension that matters, even though that's really the one that so many of us are concerned about. It is all the dimensions, and when they're working together, they provide the high level of quality in class. So as we look at this chart that I know so many of you are familiar with from your class manual or maybe your class dimensions guide, I want to remind everyone about the language that describes the class. When we think about the class, we think about domains. And the three domains are emotional support, classroom organization, and instructional support. And then we think about dimensions, and then each of the dimensions, such as positive climate, are further developed into indicators and behavioral markers. And it's the behavioral markers that it's so important for us to focus on with our teachers, because they represent the what we see in the classroom and what we hear in the classroom. And it's through the class we're able to give teachers specific information about those behavioral markers and a specific example that we can really see them improve. I'm going to take a moment to just talk about the three domains of the class.
best when children are engaged in meaningful activities that are of high interest to them. Children who are engaged in meaningful activities are much likely to engage in inappropriate behaviors than are children who are provided with uninteresting or insufficient activities. What would you see and hear in a classroom with high level of classroom organization? You see a teacher setting up clear routines and behavioral expectations in calm, ordered, predictable environments that support regulation. People often describe classrooms with high levels of classroom organization as well-run machines. The kids know what to do, the teacher gives clear directions, and everything works smoothly. The last domain is the instructional support domain that I think caused everyone in the field the most level of stress. And it's because it's more than just rote learning. I think we were doing so much of in the 90s and early 2000s. Really focused on problem solving and higher level thinking. Because we know those types of activities really do promote cognitive and linguistic development. We know that learning occurs within a social context, and the teacher's role is really to structure those interactions and challenges, either through open questioning, through setting out science-based activities, or through play. What would you see when you walked into a classroom with a high level of instructional support? You would see a teacher see and hear supporting high-level thinking and building on children's understanding. On a day like today, you might have a teacher asking open-ended questions about the rain and how and why about the rain, and then making connections back to the children's day. When have they had a thunderstorm at their house or at their grandmother's house? I'm going to move us now to talk a little bit more about recompetition in the class school. So as we all know, in November 2011, a new regulation from OHS instituted regulations requiring grantees that were not providing quality services to children to compete for continued funding. Under these regulations, grantees that had a low level of performance on one or more class domains were required to recompete. I think it's important to remember this point because recompetition is so stressful, but the reason for this decision was that the goal of class monitoring was really to ensure that all children in Head Start programs were provided with access to supportive and stimulating teacher-child interaction. We are all committed to the vision that all children have access to learning environments that are warm, motivating, and challenging. We know that teachers who establish strong relationships with their students and focus on making the most of their classroom interactions have the power to drive student achievement. This is important to stop there. Teachers have the power. Administrators have the power to support them. For this reason, ensuring that every child has an effective teacher every day is essential to maintaining high-quality early childhood programs. So at Keystone, we believe that measurement is a means to improvement, and that assessments must be matched and aligned and sustain professional development, support, and transform learning. Over the years, one of the things we have seen is that what gets measured gets done. And I know this is a hard thing to hear, but really, when we know we're focusing on something and when it's at the center of all of our conversations and our professional development, we do see improvement. Especially when we have a rigorous focus on teacher-child interaction, combined with a strong commitment to high-quality program improvement. It really does empower programs and teachers. And what we see is a result in student learning gains. All Head Start children deserve to have teachers who offer warm, responsive, well-organized, and stimulating interactions. The class measure assesses the quality of teacher-child interactions and is based on research that shows that effective interactions between teachers and students are the foundation of learning in our classrooms. The decision to include the class measure in the OHS designation renewal system was based on the need for a proven research-based method of interaction that is consistently linked to child outcomes. There are now many research studies that include tens of thousands of classrooms in total, and this consistent evidence shows us that the class tool really does pick up on those aspects of interactions directly related to fostering children's learning. So as I noted on the previous slide, Keystone believes that the class framework should be used as a system for improvement that helps educators learn about interactions that matter most, that it the interactions taking place in the classroom and that improve teacher effectiveness and drive student learning. So all of those things together can really change the quality of education. So in the next slide, we're looking at the class monitoring process. So at the top of it, classrooms are selected by a random sampling within a grantee. And then class certified reviewers observe for 2 cycles in those selected classrooms. Those scores are then averaged across all programs in a grantee, and then average scores on each dimension and domain are shared with the program. And we'll talk a little bit more about this process on the next slide, and we'll, as well as have a few frequently asked questions, like the typical one of why 2 cycles. So the next slide, we're going to look a little bit at the absolute and relative thresholds. So as part of the recompetition process, OHS established the minimum class thresholds that we know about. Grantees with average scores across the program that do not meet these targets will need to recompete. And those thresholds are 4 for emotional support, 3 for classroom organization, and 2 for instructional support. And then in addition to the absolute threshold, OHS has established a relative threshold. Grantees with average scores in the lowest 10% in any domain are required to recompete for funding. So if a program scores in the bottom 10% of all Head Start programs, this means that the vast majority, over 90% of Head Start programs, were assessed at higher levels. And then they also included the safe harbor, which means that if a grantee is in that lowest 10%, but they did have a domain score of 6 or 7, they are not required to recompete, even if that means that fewer than 10% would be required to compete for that domain. And I think the important piece to remember about the 10% is that those 10% thresholds will be reestablished every year based upon the scores across all programs monitored that year. And that's a frequent question that we get. The OHS has released those thresholds, and it's important to think if you are being monitored the following year, to have those in mind, but the fact that those will change from year to year. You're looking at a new sample of grantees with a new set of. So before we conclude this section of the presentation, I want to address a few frequently asked questions that we've been posed at conferences and presentations. The information from all these answers comes from the OHS eSled website, and we'll share that at the end of the presentation. So the first question is the most common one and also the most difficult to explain. So the question is, why is OHS observed for only 2 cycles? So decisions about how to conduct classroom observation should be based on the goal of the observation. And I always pause when I'm talking to people, because I get this question a lot for local programs who are doing program improvement. And I think my response helps in this question about OHS. So you focus on the goal of the observations for OHS. What is their goal? Their goal is to arrive at overall class scores for each grantee, and not for individual classrooms. So to obtain accurate scores for each grantee, OHS decided to visit a greater number of classrooms, but reduce the number of cycles per classroom from 4 to 2. The Office of Head Start arrived at this decision in part based on evidence that there's more variability in class scores from classroom to classroom than there is from cycle to cycle within a single classroom. So to arrive at an average score for a grantee, observers get better information by observing in more classrooms. So the graphic on this slide depicts this. It depicts that in a grantee, a program grantee, not all classrooms are being observed, but a selection is being observed. Because we know that more reliable program data comes from visiting more classrooms rather than staying longer in each classroom. It's my understanding that Head Start looked at a variety of possible observation methods, including using 1 cycle per program in 2010 before making this decision of 2 cycles per classroom. So as I noted before, it's important to marry the goal of data collection with the purpose, and the purpose of data collection with the method that you choose. So another question that we often get are why is classroom level feedback to teachers. The goal is to give the highest confidence towards the program level. So as a result, monitoring scores are not meant to be shared at the classroom level for individual classroom feedback. To share scores in ranges at the classroom level, the class author suggests a minimum of 4 cycles per classroom. The program is interested in getting direct teacher feedback and doing direct teacher improvement plans to do their own observations and then follow that protocol. So the question then comes, what can I do? I've just finished monitoring, what should I do with those domain and dimension scores? So some suggestions include looking at those monitoring results with aggregated OHS monitoring results from that year, because those two sets of scores are collected with the same methodology. And then my other suggestion is to take your domain and dimension level scores and look at them as a community and decide what are the strengths of this data telling me and what are my areas for growth. And taking those strengths and areas of growth and then making a professional development plan, but again, for your entire grantee system, not just one or two individuals. So the last question that we often receive are, why are class scores different from monitoring results? So this would be a situation where I, as a program, have collected class scores, and then the monitoring results come back and are different. So although the questions have risen from time to time, in many of my recent conversations from grantees who were just observed in this last round, I have found confidence between their local scores they have done and the monitoring results. And these are usually situations where programs have put in a protocol across a year or multiple years of collecting class data. But some of the reasons why could be the difference in methodology, but it could also have to do with the OHS rigorous quality assurance and others. So the OHS ensures that their monitors are currently reliable in the staff, have recertified, they're calibrating with the tool on a reputable basis, and they're also being double coded. And actually, I thought of one additional frequently asked question that I wanted to include here. So OHS has released their average grantee level scores for fiscal year 2012, and those are 5.9 in emotional support, 5.45 in classroom organization, and 2.89 in instruction. We can share those as well. So additional information regarding the class tool and monitoring can be found on Teachstone's website as well as the OHS website, and we will share that in an email after this presentation. I'm now going to hand this over to Clarissa to talk more about strategies for improving teacher-child interaction.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I had myself muted so I could shuffle my papers. So yeah, thank you, Rebecca. I think that's a really good explanation of the purpose and the process behind the monitoring. That's awesome. So yeah, I'm going to be looking at some of the strategies for improving interactions in the classroom. I'm going to see if I can't. There we go. So one of the things that Rebecca mentioned that I think is really important is having the children be really engaged in their activities and all the different experiences that we bring to the classroom. So when we think about that, we're also looking at effective professional development. It's not enough just to purchase a new curriculum and hand the binder to a teacher. Especially if you're using an evidence-based program, you need to understand what the guidelines are and how other groups have used that same curriculum. For example, if you think about training teachers on a new inquiry-based science curriculum, one teacher might go back to their classroom and do some of the activities with the children, but may not explain them correctly or draw children's attention to the right aspects of the experiment. So the children really don't learn that much about the science behind it. Whereas another teacher who doesn't do any of the activities at all, and then a third teacher who follows the manual to a T and really gets the children deliver the content or lead to changes in teaching. Those components should be implemented with a high degree of quality and fidelity to the program model. So think about how your program is incorporating checks or supports to ensure that the components in particular are being delivered correctly. So it could be through an observation or having the teacher report on what she's doing, or having a coach check in with the teacher to talk about implementation of a curriculum. But the most important thing is to get the most out of professional development. There's got to be some sort of support for high quality implementation. So let's look at some of the strategies for each of the different domains of the class. The first one is emotional support strategies. Some of these may seem very obvious, but there's no way to overstate their importance. The very first thing on the list there is get to know each child. Again, that seems so obvious, and of course, we all want to do that, but the important thing is to really get to know each child and what motivates them, and understanding how their rhythm changes from day to day and from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. It's important also to convey genuine interest and talk with children respectfully, be sensitive to their feelings, and to be a good listener, responding to what you hear, as opposed to just, Hold high expectations for every child. And my favorite is validate children's accomplishments and progress specifically. The reason why that is my favorite is because I feel it's so important to, rather than use a generic good job kind of praise, that we actually tell the child what it is we're praising. So for instance, if I tell a child, good job, that might mean to him, oh, I'm doing a good job sitting in my chair, or I'm doing a good job sharing the markers with my friends, or I did a really good job drawing the most fearsome monster ever. So without being clear about what it is that is a good job, children are not as likely to repeat that behavior. So again, we want to validate their accomplishments and progress specifically. Tell them what it is that we're praising them on. Talking with children is essential to building nurturing relationships and promoting children's development and learning. I think a lot of times we might be surprised at how little we actually talk with children and actually talk at children. So when we talk to children, it's part of a meaningful interaction that includes observing children, reflecting on what we're learning about them, and responding appropriately. So for instance, on the screen you can see that a way you might reflect back to a child is to say something like, Carlos, I see that you used all the square blocks. You stacked them very high. A way of validating what a child is doing is to say, Jan, you figured out how to make the car go down the ramp faster. And even asking simple questions like, what was the hardest part, is a great way to really interact with children and to make them think. Sometimes teachers may have a hard time coming up with some of these open-ended questions. So one of our strategies that we like to share is to post a list of open-ended questions in the classroom. As you see here on the screen, you could be like a chart paper that's at teacher eye level, or you could have sentence strips with those same open-ended questions around the room. So the teacher, regardless of where she is in the classroom, can kind of spot those open-ended questions to be as a prompt for her. Let's look at the practical strategies for classroom organization strategies. So here, for me, the most important thing is to implement, teach, and probably most important of all, is to reinforce a classroom management system that tells the teachers tell the children exactly what's expected of them in each area of the classroom. And also to include the children in developing a clear set of expectations to support their success. So the more the children are actually involved in creating the rules for their classroom, the more likely they are to follow them and to reinforce them with their friends. As part of the classroom organization, I thought I would share a little bit of this study that was done by the National Center for Early Development and Learning. They looked at multi-state pre-K classrooms, and what they did was they looked at child engagement throughout the day. Where were they spending their time? So what they did is they kept track of how much time was spent in the various types of activities. So you see over there 12% in literacy strategies that a lot of people are familiar with are the Mighty Minutes. These came as a result of that need to make the most of every second, every single second. So as you see here, we've got the Mighty Minutes in English and in Spanish, and you see the card number 8. All they are is basically little chants or rhymes or games or songs that specifically meet learning objectives. So it's not just filler activities. They are activities with a purpose. So the teacher can do these as children are lining up or as a way of dismissing them from one area to the next. And here you see this is a really simple one where you sing The Farmer in the Dell, and every time you sing it, you take out a word and the children clap, and they respond with the word that goes in the blank. So that's part of phonological awareness, but mostly it's just a lot of fun, and it keeps them engaged. So let's take a look at the instructional support strategies. As Rebecca mentioned, instructional support is the one that is the area that probably gives the most stress to teachers. And what's important there is to focus on taking advantage of child-initiated learning, asking those open-ended questions about their work and discoveries to promote those higher-order thinking skills. So that comes along with doing things like using self-talk, providing hints, or discussing how the teacher plans her activities. Is she making time to really open up ways for the children to share their ideas? Another part of, there you go. Another part of supporting instructional support is by using hands-on exploration. Those promote these areas really naturally. As children are exploring real hands-on materials, they just naturally are drawn to these higher order concepts like analyzing and comparing and using different vocabulary to extend their learning. And this is the kind of thing that really makes children come alive with wonder. And the same thing for teachers, too. Teachers get excited to see the children so engaged and excited about their work. This is when you see a lot of I wonder questions come through. Oh, sorry, I just want to mention, go back just one thing. So here you see children are exploring trees and balls. So you have you see a little girl in pink who's dropping the balls to see how they bounce. And the girl up here in the top right-hand corner, they're measuring how high the ball bounces by using string. And then you've got children exploring trees by reading about trees and also by seeing whether branches and acorns and things like that will float. So really hands-on, fun activities will keep the children involved and open up all sorts of great discussions. Okay. Another way to focus on these, the class dimensions, especially around instructional support, is a way of reading aloud. So we know that it's super fun for children to read aloud and to be read to. But what does the research say about the importance of reading aloud? Let's take a look. Oops, there you go. Effective read-alouds are those in which children are actively involved. So they're spending time asking questions, making predictions, answering questions. They're so excited by the story. They're retelling the story. They're dramatizing the story. They're hearing the vocabulary words in context. And they're learning to use those vocabulary words as they describe the illustrations or they discuss the book events. And they engage in analytical talk. They're thinking about why characters behave in a certain way or what might have happened if something had changed in the story. And the last one, for me, is one of the more important ones. It's important that teachers read the same story over time. Now, children will always want to read the same book over and over. But it's important that as children are hearing the story over and over, they're learning something a little bit different each time. Each time they dig in a little bit more. And we at Teaching Strategies, if you notice in the picture here on the screen, we really do recommend that teachers engage in these repeated read-alouds in small groups. But having a small group, it helps children to really spend that one-on-one time with their teacher and slide is just a quick glance at some of the materials that we offer, some of our resources that helps promote interactions and experiences. So we've got the Teaching Strategies Gold app on the very far right-hand side. And what that is meant to do is to help the teacher stay engaged with the child as they're still just collecting data. We also have the creative curriculum for preschool, and included in the preschool creative curriculum, we've got the Mighty Minutes and the book discussion cards, which leads to teachers through 3 different read-alouds. Each read-aloud is a little different and more complex. And our new Coaching to Fidelity and the Fidelity tool, these are our fidelity resources that help measure how well teachers are implementing the creative curriculum. So this is a quick view of one of our documents that we have on our website under the Head Start page. This is an alignment of our creative curriculum for preschool with the classroom assessment scoring system, the class. So as you see on this screen here, on the left-hand side, you have the different elements of the creative curriculum. And on the right-hand side, on the top there, you've got the different dimensions. So where you see dots, that's where the two align. Hey, Rebecca.
Thank you. Let's get back for a second to this idea of learn, measure, improve. So I think it's important as we focus on what are the strategies that we should use to improve teacher-child interactions. One of the things we need to think about is where our individual programs are. So where should we focus our resources? And one of the things I see as we are out working in the Head Start communities is that programs are at different kind of time frames on the continuum in implementing class. Some people have started about 5 years ago, and so they are really focusing at their improved side at this point. We have other grantees that I know are just beginning to do some work focusing on class, and they're really focused on the learn. So I'm going to take a couple minutes and just talk about some different things that can be done. I would think if I'm a learn classroom or if I'm an improved. So as I said earlier, it's important to spend time on all 3 aspects of the class system. So we can really think about how a program wants to develop their implementation plan. So thinking about, do I need to spend time allowing individuals to learn about the class? Do I need to start measuring effective teacher-child interaction? So should I have local observers trained so that I can start doing my own classroom observations and giving feedback? And then last, how much time should I spend improving about teaching and learning in the program? So one of the things I think about is doing a really quick survey, either verbally, your survey monkey within a program, and just get a baseline, kind of to teachers. Do you have a low level of information about the class? Are you discussing it at all? Do you have a mid-level? Are you sometimes discussing it? Or do you have a high level of knowledge about the class? To get a feeling across the program. Because one of the things we know is even within a specific grantee, as teachers come in and out, and administrators come in and out, people have different levels of knowledge about the class. So one of the most important things to make sure that everyone has this baseline learn level of knowledge. I think it's important to make sure that across the board, everyone within the program has that foundational knowledge. It's important to make sure people understand what it is about the class and to help gain buy-in. One of the things we know from research is that teachers are more apt to support a program if they understand why it was chosen, why it was important, and how it relates to their work. And so I think as you're introducing the class locally, those first 3 comments that I made around the relationship slide, that really ties it back. The class isn't something new, that it really is tied to what they are already doing, and that you want them to do more consistency and more. So if you're a program that really is beginning to introduce the class, 3 of the questions that I focus on are how are effective interactions organized, what are the domains, indicators, and behavioral markers, and then what is the research base for the class. And so Teachstone provides resources that can be used. So we provide dimensions guides, and then the introduction to the class tool. Actually, just on a call with the state of Florida today, and they said we have boxes of dimensions guides sitting and no one's using them. And one of the things I talked about is that the dimensions guide is a living document. One of the things we know from adult learning is that if we give something to someone and then they put it in their briefcase or they put it in their bag, they're not going to use it. So one of the things to think about is how can I use that dimensions guide as an active piece of learning? So if I have a coach, the teacher have a dimensions guide and the coach have a dimensions guide. Then together they take the dimensions together to talk about that teacher could get to the level. And then the second piece is the introduction to the class piece. Teacher provides an online instruction to the class, and then all ECE specialists are trained to do introductions to the class. We always think about providing information to curriculum managers, to directors, and to teachers. But while I was at the NHSA conference a couple weeks ago, I went to a program with a group from Ohio. And one of the who just completed monitoring. One of the things they told me is that they had a across-the-board program having people learn about the class. And so what they did is they introduced it not just to their administrators and to the curriculum directors, but they introduced it as well to nurses, family service coordinators, health workers, as well as bus drivers, and even the cooks. And they made sure that each of them had this base level information about the class so that they knew what a teacher-child interaction was, and they gave them 3 examples of a teacher-child interaction that they could do in their day-to-day work. And then the second piece is the improved piece. So if you're a program that's done observations, we always get the question, what next? So I think it's important that you just don't do observations and have that data either sitting in reports or sitting on graphs, on paper. It's important, first of all, after you observe in classrooms, to complete that feedback loop and to share those scores for the high, mid, low range of teachers. But then it's also important to develop some kind of professional development that they can use to work on affecting change. And it's important to think about it, as Clarissa said, not just on a one and gone, but how are you going to provide that support on an ongoing basis? So thinking about it at the dimension level to say, I'm going to focus on one dimension a week or one dimension a month, and building it as a continuous improvement plan. So it's not just a 1-hour webinar, but it's something that you do every week and every month throughout the school year so that it's sustained. So at Teachstone, we provide a few resources to help in this area. We video libraries to show examples of effective interactions and exemplar video. We also include a discussion toolkit, and that helps organizations figure out what to do with those dimensions guides in those video library accounts, and include the facilitator's guide to guide conversations for coaches or for curriculum directors. We also provide an online program called Looking at Classrooms that is available in Spanish and English that focuses on dimensions. And then Making the Most of Classroom Interactions is a program in which we train newer instructors to do a dimension-focused face-to-face program. And then last, our pinnacle program is our My Coaching program. It's a 10-month program focused on improving interactions with speaking pace. And so just as I was saying, it's important to continue to do all these things in a sustained way, not just on one strategy or one workshop, but thinking about how you can weave those all together across the day. And I'm going to turn it back over to Mia, I think.
Great. Thank you both, Clarissa and Lisa, for all of that information. We definitely want to take questions, and I know that many of you have already submitted some. Again, I'm putting up some contact information as well. If you have additional questions you want to ask, you can reach out to us. For starters, one of the things that we'd like to hear, or we have a group of individuals that would like to hear, is if we could please repeat the threshold scores. So, Lisa, I'm sorry, Rebecca, do you want to take that one?
Yep. So the threshold scores are 4 for emotional support, 3 for classroom organization, and 2 for instructional support. And then I'm just going to repeat those 2012 averages. Those were just be looking across everyone who was monitored, would be 5.9 for emotional support, 5.45 for classroom organization, and 2.98 for instructional.
Okay, great. We also wanted to hear a little bit more about why are we unable to see the exact scores from observations?
My understanding is that's an OHS decision, and it goes back to my pieces about what are the goals. So the goal was not to share scores at the classroom level. The goal was to look at a reliable sample across the entire grantee. And so OHS has decided to not share those individual classroom scores because they were not meant to give individual classroom feedback to individual classrooms. The decision of monitoring was to look across an entire grantee and to provide, to make a decision on quality. And then so those scores, the grantee level averages should just be used to develop professional development in areas of strength and areas.
Okay, and how are the monitoring class results being double coded?
So I don't have insight into, I can talk about double coding. I don't have insight into the exact OHS process. But what is happening is the monitors are going through a process, like everyone, of research, of passing a reliability test and then having a yearly recertification. But in addition, they are doing frequent calibration. And what calibration is they watch a video and code it for accuracy. And then the process of double coding is when a second individual goes into a classroom with the primary coder, and they code to match accuracy. And then there is also a system where there's a primary coder, a double coder, and then a master coder who is also double coded. But I don't have OHS has not shared some of their monitoring information, such as I know one of the questions came up is how are they doing their sample. That information has not been shared with us, as well as what is the frequency of double coding is not something that's shared with us either.
Okay, a lot of these questions are really technical, which is great. We love having those and getting into more depth about these. So if we haven't adequately or fully addressed those, please know that we will be following up with you individually after the webinar to discuss that with you on a more individual basis in as much depth as we can provide, either on behalf of Teachstone or Teaching Strategies. One of the other questions that we have is, has anyone developed a tool for tracking scores?
So this is Rebecca from Teachstone. So we know that organizations grantees have locally created things such as Excel documents or Access documents to track things. We also know that an organization called Wells, which works with state QRS systems, has a tracking system within their program. And then I just met with a gentleman from Child Plus, and within Child Plus, there is now a system for tracking class scores. Teachstone is also piloting a class data system that allows organizations to input their class scores after observation, and then will generate a report to share information about those scores.
Great. And then someone is also asking if we could please describe what we mean by cycle.
Oh, sure. This is Rebecca. So when we talk about a cycle, I'm going to focus just only talking about the class. So when a class observer goes out into a classroom, what he or she does is spend 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes, in what I call active observation. And I think about it, I describe it as eyes up when I train. So I am looking at that classroom, looking across the adults in that classroom, and taking notes on what I see. And then I spend 10 minutes in what I call eyes down, where I am actually coding, assigning codes to that. So when I went into the dimensions, I didn't go into the specific class as a system. Each of the dimensions
Okay, great. And then we have another question. Again, this is for Teachstone. Should the same person attend the class training each time and take information back to the Head Start program, or should a new person attend each time so they can each get a first look?
Sure. I'm going to take a second and just explain maybe the training options out there. So there's three types of training. One would be an introduction to the class training, where that's actually a 2, a 4, or a 6-hour. And as I said, it's meant to be on that learn side. Provide some simple information about what is the domain, what is the dimension, what do effective interactions look like. And an introduction to the class that could be done by Teachstone, or PTE specialists are trained to do them, as well as local programs can be trained to do them. It's something I would recommend across the board for everyone in the program, so that everyone has that baseline information. One of the problems I see is that there's often varied information. Some people may have done a presentation guide, some people may have done an intro, but making sure you have this very solid baseline. The second kind of training is what we call observation training, and that is the 2-day training that is provided so that people can become class observers. And so the goal of that training really is to have people become reliable observers. So it's not meant to be an introduction. It's really not necessarily meant for teachers unless they're going to be actively coding. And that is a training that you go to once. After the completion of the training, you test for reliability, and then you annually recertify. So that's not a training that you need to necessarily go to over and over again. Once you have gained reliability, you can annually recertify without attending the training again. And then the last kind of training is what we call our train the trainer. And that's when we train people who are already observers to be local trainers. We call them affiliate trainers. And that's a 3-day training. Once they complete that, they can themselves do observation training and introduction to the class training for their organization. And the majority or all of the UC specialists should all be trained as a trainer, so then they can come to grantees and do observation training and introduction to the class. Grantees can also choose to use their professional development money to send individuals to observation training so that they host classrooms locally. And we're seeing more people who's local observers. So to the question of should someone come back or should different people go, an introduction to the class, everyone in the program should do that and essentially come back to that information and build on that. So the observation training, once you've gone to it once, you do not necessarily need to go to it again, as long as you're maintaining your reliability. I hope I answered that question.
Great, thanks. Again, we're actually wrapping up the Q&A session because we're running out of time, but we appreciate everyone that has stayed on the call with us. We're going to take one more question. It's for Clarissa. If you could just review again the classroom organization strategies. I think there's a lot of interest in that from several participants. And then after this question, I just want to remind everyone that we will be following up on any questions that we did not answer live via email within the next week. Again, our contact information is listed here on this slide, so feel free to send emails with any specific questions that you might have for Teachstone or teaching strategies. Clarissa?
Okay, so the strategies that we shared for the classroom organization, that was the first thing was to make sure that there's a clear classroom management system in place. So a system where the children know how many children are meant to be in each area and what the expectations are for the stand and water table, or what the expectations are for the block area. And also a way of having the children involved in creating the rules for the classroom and the expectations. So again, just so the children know what is expected, they're the ones creating that set of rules. in English and in Spanish, and they are available separately. You don't have to buy the whole creative curriculum for preschool.
Great, thank you, Clarissa. Thanks everyone who joined us. Again, this is Amanda Klein from Teaching Strategies, and I was joined today by Rebecca Berlin from Teachstone and Clarissa Martinez from Teaching Strategies. I want to thank both of them for a wonderful presentation. We will archive this webinar, and it'll be available in about a week for you to pass on to other colleagues who may not have been able to make it today. And we will continue taking questions and continue conversations with each of you individually as you reach out to us via our email addresses. And we look forward to continuing to support the great work that you're doing in Head Start. And we thank you again for joining us today.